And welcome. Thank you for coming today. I am Ashley, they, them, and I will be your NAGT support person for today. And I am so excited to get in today's webinar. I do want to cover a few things first, though. The NAGT webinar series is a one-stop shop for increasing our community's capacity in Earth education. Webinars in our series feature novel and innovative work such as Earth education research pedagogy, new teaching materials, and the classroom and professional experiences of people just like you. The NAGT webinar series is free and open to the public. We often get questions about whether it's okay to invite your colleagues, and yes, please invite your colleagues. We'd love to have them. Um, throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the chat box for a place for discussion, questions, and comments. Additionally, feel free to use the reactions tab. Otherwise, in terms of interacting with each other in the shared cyberspace, please remember that we do still follow the NAGT Code of Conduct, which expects and endorses a professional and respectful atmosphere and values diversity in creating an inclusive, supportive, and collaborative environment. I'll drop that in the chat for you to review as you have time. And today we have a wonderful webinar called Affective Domain Mini Lessons in Introductory Geology Classes. And so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Julie, Molly, and Jen to get us started.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you so much for all of your support in getting us to this point. Jen, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So it's so great that you are all here today to join us. We're excited to work with you and interact with you today. So as Ashley mentioned, our title, we'll be focusing on the affective domain mini lessons that we created in a study partially supported by NSF. We'll go through and introduce ourselves as your webinar leaders. I'm Julie Sexton. I'm an independent consultant. I specialize in geoscience education research with a particular specialty in diversity, equity, and inclusion for marginalized groups in undergraduate geoscience programs, and particularly women. Molly, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Molly Jameson, she, her. I am the director of the Center for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning and a professor of educational psychology at the University of Northern Colorado. My research area has focused on affective domains specifically related to math. So math anxiety, math confidence, things like that, and how we can use that information to understand people's choices and decisions related to STEM. Jen?
Hi, everybody. My name is Jen Wenner, and I'm a professor of geology at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. My interest in this project stemmed from some work I did with Eric Baer on, who is here today, on learning math in introductory geoscience classes and learning quantitative skills. And so I've done a lot of work thinking about the quantitative skills side of things, and I helped Julie and Molly think about how to do similar kinds of lessons with affective domain.
Thank you all. Next slide. We have a really amazing team, and our the graduate students that worked with us are amazing. They're not able to be here. They've gone on and graduated. So thank you for such a great team. I've enjoyed working with everyone so much. Here's our agenda. So we've done a little welcome. We're going to cover our learning outcomes. Then we'll talk about the motivation to create the lessons. I'll hand it off to Molly to talk about the affective domain. Molly and Jen will give us an overview of the mini lessons, and then we'll do the rest of the time in an activity focused specifically on math anxiety, and then we'll wrap up. Next. So we have 2 learning outcomes for you all today. First, that you'll be able to describe the affective domain factors that are important for geoscience student learning and selection and persistence in a geoscience major. And then you'll be able to identify when and how to integrate the math anxiety mini lesson into your class. Next. So we'll go ahead and move on to the background to this project. So women continue to be underrepresented and marginalized in geoscience. The latest numbers I've seen are still women are about 40% of geoscience degree earners. And at the workforce area, the numbers show about 25 to 30% of geoscientists are women. I've been doing research for nearly 15 years on barriers and supports for women in undergraduate geoscience programs. And a previous study was the foundation for the research and the interventions that you're going to see today. And that is, in a previous study, we collected data from 6 geoscience departments and found faculty and students describing math as a barrier for women and in geoscience. And that aligns with the larger literature that math is a barrier for female student selection and persistence in STEM disciplines overall. So with that in mind, that math could be a barrier for women, this project was developed as an intervention research study to reduce math as a barrier, ultimately leading to increasing female students' intent to select and persist in geoscience. And in the data that we, as a pilot data that we analyzed, we heard that math could be a barrier because students don't have the math skills. And that's similar to the research Jen has done previously using mini lessons called The Math You Need When You Need It. But we also heard faculty and students talking about math as a barrier because students were anxious about math. And that's research that Molly has conducted, not specific to geoscience, but in STEM overall. So we brought together our 3 expertise. And next slide, Jen. We created an intervention research study in which we developed 3 interventions, and each intervention had 6 what we call mini lessons. We'll talk about those later. The first intervention is novel and new, and we created 6 affective domain mini lessons. The second intervention came from Jen, The Math You Need When You Need It, that she co-constructed, and we had 6 math lessons from there. And then we created a third intervention that had 3 of our affective domain lessons and 3 of our math skill lessons. And we implemented these interventions at 3 institutions of higher ed, 2 four-year regional universities, and 1 community college. And we looked to see the extent to which these interventions improved beliefs and affective domain factors about math, improved students' math skills, and ultimately led to the increase of female student selection and persistence in geoscience. Next. So today, Jen has done some, Jen and her collaborator, I think you said was here today, Jen, have done some great work with The Math You Need When You Need It, which is intervention 2. And you can find those articles and we can provide those later. Today, we're going to focus on the affective domain lessons, and particularly later, we'll focus on math anxiety. So I'm going to hand it off to Molly to talk about the affective domain.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's talk for a little bit about the affective domain and what that is, right? Learning is a really complex process. And when people learn, they can learn different kinds of information or different things influence their learning. So in this figure, you'll see at the top is the cognitive domain. This is when people learn knowledge, right? Like learning what a topographic map is. Most people are familiar with this kind of learning, right? The cognitive domain is knowledge. But people can also learn physical skills called the psychomotor domain here. This would be like learning how to construct a topographic map. And then, as Julie mentioned, the focus of our presentation today and of the interventions we developed is the affective domain, right? Attitudes. This would be like students learning how to improve their confidence in their ability to draw a topographic map. Right. People don't talk a lot about teaching and learning attitudes, especially in science, but students' attitudes really strongly affect their learning. So, for example, if a student feels confident that they're going to be able to learn about maps, they actually are more likely to learn about and retain more information about what a topographic map is and how to actually construct them. Their improved learning in those other areas, in the cognitive domain and in the psychomotor domain, can then further affect their affective domain, make them feel more confident, more likely to engage with the material. Alternatively, if they do not feel confident in learning about topographic maps, they're actually less likely to learn it. So the emotions and the attitudes that we have about ourselves, about learning, about the topic, are really important. And student attitudes in math and in quantitative skills, it is an area that's received a lot of research attention, though not so much in geoscience, right? Like Jen and her team have done the work on the math skills, but the math affect is an area that's kind of been overlooked in geoscience. So our project is focused on changing the students' affective domain, helping them to develop more positive attitudes towards math, positive attitudes towards themselves and towards learning, so that potentially we can remove or reduce math as a barrier for geoscience students, particularly female geoscience students. So before we move into our actual talking about, you know, the specific areas of our lessons, we wanted to do a really quick poll about your experiences. So can we go to the next page? Yeah, so this is our poll. So think about how your students have experienced math anxiety, right? As an instructor with students, think about what have they done that has shown you that they experience math anxiety. So look at the options that are here. And then did the poll come up? I don't see it on my screen. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. Thank you. So just identify like what are the 3 options that you have most observed in your students? Right, lots of things saying, I'm not a math person, I can't do math. They say, I hate math. All right, we'll take just another minute or another few seconds to let the rest of you, right? All right, excellent. Did you share those results? Somebody?
Yep, they're shared.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So as you can see, there's a lot of people hearing their students say, I'm not a math person, right? I hate math. I can't do math. And these are really common side effects of students having negative affect towards math. And we do see this. The research supports this. And you all just talked about your positive experience. Oh, I think we went ahead too far. Ah, sorry. Thank you. Right. And you all have experienced this. And if you are someone who has math anxiety, you might notice you sweat, you get headaches, you have a racing heart, right? It's harder to notice those in our students. But those are also things that happen. And sometimes result when students are sweating or getting headaches or having a racing heart. Sometimes they leave, go to the bathroom, right? Step out in the hallway. And that's because they're experiencing these bodily reactions. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit more about math anxiety. Right, so math anxiety is one of the really important domain topics, but these are our 6 affective domain factors that, based on the scholarly literature in discipline-based education research, educational psychology, education, and psychology, we picked these 6 topics to be our mini lesson topics. Like we said earlier, we are going to focus on math anxiety today for a couple of reasons, but one of them is that math anxiety has received a lot of attention in the literature, in large part because a lot of students report having math anxiety. Math anxiety is more than just a dislike of math, right? A lot of folks dislike math, but people who have math anxiety, it goes beyond dislike to an actual fear reaction that occurs when people think about math or actually do math. And like we just talked about in the poll, students with high math anxiety have negative thoughts or make negative statements about themselves and about math in general. They avoid math. Their confidence is low. They have bodily stress reactions, like we talked about with the sweating and the racing hearts. And though geoscience is perceived by students as mathematically light, as you all know, it is not, right? So students with high math anxiety might be drawn to geoscience thinking that it's less math intensive, and then they may be surprised and experience heightened math anxiety when there is math in the geoscience class. And then this can lead to a lack of interest, decreased motivation, things like that. All right. So, as Julie mentioned, this is part of an ongoing research project, partially funded by NSF. And for several years, we have implemented these interventions in different classes, collecting baseline data at the beginning of the semester, and then kind of analyzing that. Now, the effects of the intervention, that research is still ongoing, but we do have some really cool and interesting findings that we want to share with you about what we found so far. So, Jen, if you could go on to the next slide. So there's kind of two broad categories that we're finding in our ongoing research. The first, it supports the importance of the affective domain, right? This is something in geoscience that you've talked about before historically in your own research. That interest is something in geoscience that's really important. And we find that in our research as well. The students who have higher levels of interest are more likely to select and persist in geoscience classes. Also, what we find is that students with stronger geoscience self-efficacy or confidence in their ability to do geoscience tasks, have a stronger interest in geoscience. What we find that's really new and really exciting is that math attitudes, that affective domain specifically related to math, is also really important in geoscience students. So specifically what we found is about 47% of women and 31% of men in introductory geoscience classes express negative emotions, thoughts, and physical reactions related to math. Right, that's a pretty big number. Almost half of the women and a third of the men are expressing negative attitudes towards math. And what I'm super excited about is this finding that for women, but not men, math self-efficacy is a significant predictor of their interest in geoscience. So female students with higher levels of confidence in math are more interested in geoscience information, right? Again, just for female students. So that's some of the results of our ongoing research. Like I said, we're still working on it. We're still analyzing data, but we're starting to really show that this affective domain in math is really important in intro geoscience. Next slide, Jen.
Okay, so now Molly and I are going to give an overview of the mini lessons, and I'm going to start with just a couple of things about the lesson components. Each lesson that we have of those 6 topics that Molly showed earlier have 4 parts. There's a reading part where they read about the content and learn about strategies. There's practice problems where they practice what they've learned. And then there's an assessment and an application activity where they can show what they've learned and apply what they've learned. So we're going to run through that right now. And I need to switch over to the web page. So we're going to run through it in the web page here, and we're going to focus on math anxiety. So this is the first page, which was labeled reading on the previous slide. This is where they read some learning stories.
Mm-hmm. And those learning stories are really intentionally, you'll see this all in a minute when you get into the module, the lesson yourself, but the learning stories are contextualized in geoscience situations with undergraduate students. So they're relevant and, relatable to the students reading them.
And then they learn the content about how it impacts their learning and why it occurs.
And sorry, all of that content that Jen is showing you about what is math anxiety, what are the reasons that it happens, those are all evidence-based pieces of information drawn from peer-reviewed literature, so that students have, down to earth, easy to understand, but it is evidence-based. And this also means you, as the geoscience instructor, don't have to be an expert. You don't need to know what math anxiety is because it's in this content for you in a really understandable way.
And then they have some information about how they can improve their learning through decreasing math anxiety or increasing self-efficacy or those kinds of things.
And again, those are also research-based too, right?
Yes.
So all of our strategies are from published research.
Yep. And we can, you can expand to think about how you can do that. And then eventually at the bottom of the page, when they've learned what they think they need to learn, they can move on to the practice problem page, the second page. And so if they click on this bar, they go to a practice problem page. And these are similar. They're set in the same way that the previous one is, with a learning story and then questions. And the questions are set up so they get immediate feedback. So if we try question B on question 2, it says, oh, that's wrong. Let's try A. So it gives some information about whether it's correct or not. And then you can reset it and try again. And then when they get to the bottom, they can click on this. Now, right now, we have this link to a Qualtrics survey. This goes to University of Northern Colorado. We are working on getting these assessments into something that is usable by instructors. But this is the third and fourth parts, which is the assessment and application activity. And if you click on that, you can go through and read through that. You're welcome to take the assessment when you're exploring and so on. Okay, so anything else you want to add, Molly?
Nope.
Okay.
Can I add something real quick? Jen, can I
Yes,
add
go ahead,
something real quick? I
Julie.
totally forgot about this. So something that we forgot to add is that the reading, practice problems, and assessment all occur before students were, so let's say a student is going to be taking, has a lab that has a lot of math in it, then we might have a math anxiety lesson, the mini lesson, and the reading, practice problems, and assessment would all happen prior to the lab, let's say, and then the application activity occurs at the beginning of the lab. So just as a this timing of when this happens.
Yep. Okay, so now we are about 22 minutes past the hour, and we're going to give you an opportunity to explore the activity of the math anxiety, and then we're going to have you discuss in breakout rooms. So we're going to move you into a breakout room, and Julie's going to put the information from that previous table and the questions we want you to discuss in the chat so that you can have access to them when you go into the breakout room. We're not going to record. The breakout rooms will not be recorded. And your first task is to individually explore the lesson, which is also in the chat, right, Julie? I can't see the chat. Yeah, which is in the chat. And then we encourage you to do that. You can go into the room and keep your camera off. And when you're done, turn your camera on, and then folks can share answers to the questions. And we'll give you about 20 minutes total. So take 10 minutes or so to explore the lesson, and then give yourself about 10 minutes to talk to each other, introduce yourselves. And then we'll bring you back around. Okay, so we brought you back a little early, and before the end anyway, to do a little bit of wrap up and to see if there are things folks would like to share or had questions about. Sorry, I'm going to move forward, or had feedback about. So and Julie reminded me, one thing that we want to point out is that it's important to integrate these lessons into your course in a way that gets all students engaged with them. That's one of the things that the Math You Need figured out, was that you can't just assign it to the folks who specifically you think need it, because the students don't always do it, and they often feel less confident because you're telling them that they're deficient in that kind of thing. So thinking about assigning them to all the students and making sure that you talk about the concepts that are covered in the class. So I'm going to open it up. Are there folks who would like to share
And I just put a
Yeah.
question in there too to prompt folks if you wanted to also share something valuable or missing about the lesson, and open free share as well.
Feel free to raise your hand or just unmute and say something.
Jen, can you stop sharing so we can see everybody?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a great question in the chat about, so it looks like Lorraine asked, what's the motivation to get students to do these, right? And I'll give a couple of quick thoughts. I think what a lot of research finds in educational interventions is first that if the instructor of the class is supportive and like excited about it, even if you don't fully understand it, even if you're like, there's this thing I heard about and I want to try it, it's supposed to help you learn better. You can use this across all of your classes. We actually hear that a lot, folks saying, I used this in my music history class, or I used the expressive writing when I was feeling nervous about my chemistry class, you know. And so talking to the students, saying, you know, opening the veil to them and saying, a lot of folks don't know how learning works. Your emotions are important in your learning. And so let's try to help everybody feel a little bit more positive. And I think that's one of the ways. We also, for our research, got buy-in from our instructors to offer a small amount of points. Right. So made them an assignment similar to, like, you know, if you're doing the math you need when you need it, that's probably an assignment. You give them, you know, credit for doing it. These also, students could get a small amount of participation credit, or, you know, whatever. And that can serve as a big impetus too.
And that was something also that we found in our study, was you needed to give them some points for it, but not too much. Like it couldn't be all like, this is 50% of your grade. It needed to be like, you know, a 5% thing. So they felt like it would, or 2% or whatever. So they felt like it would affect their grade in some way, but not so much that if they were like, I can't do this, they didn't. They, you know.
Yeah, I wanted to address that next question from Heather. What was your experience when these were assigned to all students? How do the students who don't have math anxiety respond in your experience? And it was really interesting because we had Likert scale questions about math anxiety, and we also had open-ended like in the math anxiety lesson, there's an open-ended question where students write about their math history. And sometimes those things were not aligned. So a student might actually talk about having low math anxiety in their Likert scale, but in their open-ended story, they would actually describe like some math anxiety in their background. So we're not sure if it's the timing of when the lesson happened versus like, so the Likert scale questions were the first couple of weeks of class, and then the math anxiety lesson would come later. And so what we wonder for those that might have reported high or low on the Likert scale, but then have the opposite when they did the lesson, it could be that they learned about math anxiety later, and that had them recalibrate what they thought they had for math anxiety. So that's one. Students with low math anxiety, in the stories that we had, they would just, we actually have an article that Molly put the link to at the very end. So we have some students with low math anxiety, and they would say, I think like there's really some interesting things they would say, like, I love how math helps me learn about the world. I love math. I am not concerned about math. So that's how they would react in their writing. But I will share one thing about the lesson that was more triggering to one of our instructors into implementing it than to the students. So one of the things we did in the math anxiety lesson is we have them do a deep breathing activity, because math anxiety truly is like a math anxiety, like an anxiety where their heart can race, their thoughts go, you know, wild in their head. Learning deep breathing, just like you would with any anxiety, is something that we implemented, and we actually did it. We had an in-version part of it, and we also had an online version of it because we bounded COVID before and after COVID. And in the in-person part, as our graduate student was about to lead students into the breathing activity, the faculty member who was overseeing the class was like, I think deep breathing is silly and I can't believe that, you're going to do it in the class. And then the instructor said, I couldn't believe that all of the students had their eyes closed and they were doing the deep breathing. She's like, even the football player. And so we've gotten a range of responses just for that math anxiety one. Jen and Molly, was there something that you thought for that question?
I thought, I think that I do remember there being, a few students who were like, oh, this is silly. I'm not doing this. Right. But that's how it is with everything. Right. You're like, we're going to do this fun, cool activity. And some are like, oh, I'm so above this or, whatever. But really, for the most part, and I think it's especially because we talk to our instructors about how like these aren't just specific to geoscience. While we contextualize the lessons in geoscience and they're being implemented in a geoscience class, these are learning strategies, right? Across every discipline, across every class. Even if you're not nervous, centering yourself by some deep breathing before you go in and take an exam is going to help you because it, does some catharsis in your brain. It helps you focus, right? So we also, I think, really tried to emphasize and talk about how these are learning strategies broadly as well. And so the folks without math anxiety or who were like, I love this, I love geoscience, it's amazing, we're still able to get something out of the lessons. All right, other thoughts or questions, your own experiences with taking that math anxiety lesson, or, I heard a really good story. Don't want to call the group out, but when I popped into a breakout room, there was a really good story happening that if that person wants to share, that would be awesome. And if not, I also am not going to call you out, like I said. But anybody else can share about your thoughts about the lesson or your experiences with students who've been anxious.
One thing we discussed in our group was in a geology major, often going all the way through calculus 2 and physics 2 are requirements. And so discussing how those are actually tied into what they're going to learn in geology, because as a college student, I had raging math anxiety. I failed my calculus classes and my physics classes. But as soon as you gave me a geology application, I had no problem doing math in the geology context, but I still failed my calculus classes, which was a detriment to my degree. And so if you could help us, kind of contextualize how we justify that to our students and putting them through that hellscape, I think that would tie into our discussion.
I'm going to put in a plug for the Math You Need, which now has a majors version that Eric Bear and Rory McFadden and Beth Pratt Situala are doing. And the way that the Math You Need is set up is putting things into geologic context. And so having that, because we have found that students learn better when they have context for the math that they're doing. And I have found that as well. And as I said, I was the same. Like I failed calculus, and then part of my dissertation was deriving an equation for crystallinity in magmas because I was interested in that and I could do it once I had an application, but I couldn't solve for X for whatever reason. It didn't really matter. So didn't matter to me, but solving for phi or whatever was an important thing for me. So I think I'm going to plug that and hope that you can make use of that and maybe uh, help us to think about ways that calculus can be put into the context of, I know sometimes the math professors don't want to put things in context because math is beautiful for math's sake, but for most of us, that's not true. I have a good math friend who says that. And I think we should probably I'll let Julie, but I think we should wrap up pretty soon so we can get to the evaluation and stuff like that. Go ahead, Julie.
I just had two things to add. We did implement the affective domain lessons into an advanced class as a pilot. And so not the math skill one, but the affective domain lesson. And it was an advanced hydrogeology class that was very heavy math. And so we had majors towards the end of their program doing the affective domain. And we did get good feedback from those students that math anxiety continues. The other thing with our intro students is we had introductory students respond because we have a feedback place at the end of the lesson where they can tell us what worked for them, what didn't work for them. And we had students who were like, oh my gosh, I thought something was wrong with me all my life, and now I realized I have math anxiety. So I think that's an important thing that came out for a lot of students is that it's okay, like you have this, and here are some skills and tools to help you. That important part about the lessons is that students gain agency to start doing some of these things, sometimes because instructors don't teach the affective domain. So here are some things where students can gain some agency.
Indeed. All right, I'm going to share my screen one more time. So you can contact us. We will also share the slides. And I think Ashley's going to put a link on the webpage for this webinar. Is that correct, Ashley? Yep. Okay. With all of the slides, and the next slide, which I'm not going to show, also has the references that we've alluded to in our talk today. So,
And I also just want to say, I don't know if folks saw it, but since math anxiety has historically been like my primary area of research, I shared a podcast with you all that I did with the American Psychological Association. If you're interested in learning more specifically about I'm sorry, not about podcasting. That's not what it's about. It's about math anxiety. So if you're interested, that link is up in the chat as well, and I'll put it on the slides.
and please do the evaluation survey, which Ashley has put a link for in the chat. So we can get some feedback on the webinar, and the webinar people can get some feedback. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Let's go ahead and wrap up for today. Thank you again, Julie, Jen, and Molly. This was a really great webinar. I had a wonderful time. And while this webinar does not offer official continuing education units, if you would like an email confirming your attendance today, please complete the evaluation survey, because then you'll get a link to that confirmation form, the certificate of attendance. And I've dropped the evaluation survey into the chat. You'll be able to find the resources, so the slides and the recording on the webinar page, and that will be sent out to the NAGT the NAGT webinar series interest list, and also the list of everyone who's registered for this webinar once it's posted, so you don't have to worry about signing up for something extra. You'll get that once we've captioned it, so it'll take a day or so. And then keep an eye out for our next webinar. Hopefully it'll get posted soon. We do have a few more coming up this semester, and I hope to see you all there. Bye. Happy Monday, everyone.